An anthology of readings of Almighty God's words. Is the work of God as simple as man imagines? As believers in God, each of you should appreciate how you have truly gained the utmost exaltation and salvation by receiving the work of God in the last days and the work of His plan that He does in you today. God has made this group of people the sole focus of His work throughout all the universe. He has sacrificed all His heart's blood for you. He has reclaimed and given to you all the work of the Spirit throughout the universe. That is why you are the fortunate ones. Moreover, He has shifted His glory from Israel, His chosen people, onto you, and He shall make the purpose of His plan fully manifest through this group. Therefore, you are the ones who will receive the inheritance of God, and even more than this, you are the heirs to God's glory. Perhaps you all remember these words. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. You have all heard these words before, yet none of you understood their true meaning. Today, you are profoundly aware of their true significance. These words shall be fulfilled by God during the last days, and they shall be fulfilled in those who have been brutally persecuted by the great red dragon in the land where it lies coiled. The great red dragon persecutes God and is the enemy of God. And so, in this land, those who believe in God are thus subjected to humiliation and oppression. And these words are fulfilled in you, this group of people, as a result. Because it is embarked upon in a land that opposes God, all of God's work faces tremendous obstacles, and accomplishing many of His words takes time. Thus, people are refined as a result of God's words, which is also part of suffering. It is tremendously difficult for God to carry out His work in the land of the great red dragon. But it is through this difficulty that God does one stage of His work, making manifest His wisdom and His wondrous deeds, and using this opportunity to make this group of people complete. It is through people's suffering, through their caliber, and through all the satanic dispositions of the people of this filthy land that God does His work of purification and conquest, so that from this He may gain glory, and so that He may gain those who will bear witness to His deeds. Such is the entire significance of all the sacrifices that God has made for this group of people. That is, it is through those who oppose Him that God does the work of conquest, and only thus can the great power of God be made manifest. In other words, only those in the unclean land are worthy of inheriting the glory of God, and only this can highlight the great power of God. That is why it is from the unclean land, and from those who live in the unclean land, that the glory of God is gained. Such is the will of God. Jesus' stage of work was the same. He could only gain glory among those Pharisees who persecuted Him. If not for the persecution of the Pharisees and the betrayal of Judas, Jesus would not have been ridiculed or slandered, much less crucified, and thus could not have gained glory. Where God works in each age, and where he does his work in the flesh, is where he gains glory, and where he gains those he intends to gain. This is the plan of God's work, and this is his management. In God's plan of several thousand years, two parts of work are done in the flesh. First is the work of the crucifixion, for which he gains glory. The other is the work of conquest and perfection in the last days, for which he gains glory. This is the management of God. So do not regard God's work or God's commission to you as a simple matter. You are all heirs to God's far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, and this was specially ordained by God. Of the two parts of his glory, one is manifest in you. The entirety of one part of God's glory has been bestowed upon you, that it may be your inheritance. This is God's exaltation of you, and it is also the plan that he predetermined long ago. Given the greatness of the work God has done in the land where the great red dragon resides, if this work were moved elsewhere, it would have long ago borne great fruit and been readily accepted by man. Moreover, this work would be far too easy to accept for those clergy of the West who believe in God, for the stage of work by Jesus serves as a precedent. This is why God is unable to achieve this stage of the work of gaining glory elsewhere. When the work is supported by the people and recognized by the nations, God's glory cannot take hold. This is precisely the extraordinary significance that this stage of work holds in this land. There is not one person among you who is protected by the law. You are, instead, sanctioned by the law. Even more problematic is that people do not understand you, be it your relatives, your parents, your friends, or your colleagues. None of them understand you. When you are abandoned by God, it is impossible for you to continue living on earth. But even so, people cannot bear to be away from God, which is the significance of God's conquest of people, and is the glory of God. What you have inherited this day surpasses that of the apostles and prophets throughout the ages, and is greater even than that of Moses and Peter. Blessings cannot be obtained in a day or two. They must be earned through great sacrifice, which is to say, you must possess a love that has undergone refinement. You must possess great faith, and you must have the many truths that God requires you to attain. What is more, you must turn toward justice without being cowed or evasive, and must have a love for God that is constant unto death. You must have resolve. Changes must occur in your life disposition. Your corruption must be healed. You must accept all of God's orchestrations without complaint, and you must be obedient even unto death. This is what you ought to attain. This is the final aim of God's work, and it is what God asks of this group of people. Since He gives to you, so He will surely ask of you in return, and will surely make fitting demands of you. Therefore, there is reason to all the work God does, which shows why, time and time again, God does work that sets high standards and strict requirements. It is because of this that you should be filled with faith in God. In short, all the work of God is done for your sake, so that you may become worthy of receiving His inheritance. This is not so much for the sake of God's own glory, but for the sake of your salvation, and for perfecting this group of people who have been so profoundly afflicted in the unclean land. You should understand the will of God, and so I exhort the many ignorant people who are without any insight or sense. Do not test God, and resist no more. God has already undergone suffering never endured by any man, and long ago endured even greater humiliation in man's stead. What else can you not let go of? What could be more important than the will of God? What could be higher than God's love? It is hard enough for God to carry out His work in this unclean land. If, on top of this, man knowingly and willfully transgresses, the work of God will have to be prolonged. In short, this is in no one's best interest. It does not benefit anyone. God is not bound by time. His work and His glory come first. Therefore, He will pay any price for His work, no matter how long it takes. This is the disposition of God. He will not rest until His work is done. His work will only end when He gains the second part of His glory. If, in all the universe, God does not finish the second part of His work of gaining glory, His day will never come. His hand will never leave His chosen people. His glory will never descend upon Israel, and His plan will never be concluded. You should be able to see the will of God, and should see that the work of God is not as simple as the creation of the heavens and earth and all things. That is because the work of today is the transformation of those who have been corrupted, who are numb to the utmost degree. It is to purify those who were created but processed by Satan. It is not the creation of Adam or Eve, still less is it the creation of the light, or the creation of every plant and animal. God makes pure the things that have been corrupted by Satan, and then gains them anew. They become things that belong to Him, and they become His glory. This is not as man imagines. It is not as simple as the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them, or the work of cursing Satan to the bottomless pit. Rather, it is the work of transforming man, turning things that are negative and do not belong to Him into things that are positive and do belong to Him. This is the truth behind this stage of God's work. You must understand this and avoid oversimplifying matters. The work of God is unlike any ordinary work. Its wonderfulness and wisdom are beyond the mind of man. God does not create all things during this stage of work, but nor does He destroy them. Instead, He transforms all the things He created and purifies all the things that have been defiled by Satan. And thus does God embark upon a great enterprise, which is the entire significance of the work of God. Do you see in these words that the work of God is really so simple?